After it was revealed that Boris Johnson attended a garden party in the first COVID lockdown, not many Tories would come out to defend him. In fact, for 48 hours after the incriminating emails were first leaked, every one of Johnson's cabinet colleagues appeared to boycott TV interviews. There was one man, however, who was willing to put his neck and wig out. Michael Fabricant.
Look, from the rules point of view, that's going to be decided by Sue Gray and the Metropolitan Police, and we'll have to see what happens. What I'm trying to explain is that Boris and others felt sorry for people who are working long hours, and they were simply spilling out from their own offices into a secure garden, which is an integral part of number 10 Downing Street. And you know what? I'd rather have a Prime Minister who felt for his staff and all those hard-working people than some cold fish who really couldn't care a toss about.
They felt sorry for staff members who were working long hours, and if Boris Johnson hadn't let them have a party, he'd be showing himself as a cold, wet fish. Well, you know who else was working long hours? Doctors and nurses in A&E were hospital bosses being cold, wet fish when they didn't lay out spreads of booze and snacks for hospital staff. People in care homes were working very hard. Were the bosses at care homes being cold fish when they didn't let the staff have spreads of sausage rolls and gin and tonics? Let's watch some more of Michael Fabricant.
So many people, you know, who were prosecuted and felt they were breaking the rules was because there was the risk of them mixing with other people whom they wouldn't have otherwise met. These were the same people who had actually worked in tight offices where, of course, the risk of contagion, as we know from Boris's own infection, the risk of contagion was far higher, in fact, far less so in an open space like the garden. It is, I think the whole point, perhaps, that will be looked at by Sue Gray and the Metropolitan Police is, was that garden, you know, which is a walled garden with armed police patrolling outside, was that garden an integral part of the office space? Clearly, that was the view taken by some people who decided to get involved in that.
What absolute nonsense. First of all, it doesn't make a difference whether or not the garden was part of an office space. Social events were banned. If they took place in an office, they were banned. If they took place in a pub, they were banned. If they took place in a house, they were banned. It didn't matter where the social event took place. If it was a social event, which this was, it was banned. It makes absolutely no difference whatsoever whether or not one considers a garden part of an office, which is quite implausible anyway. Second, Fabricant is suggesting the party wasn't a problem because all the attendees would have been working together anyway. There was no extra risk because if they were to spread COVID to each other, it would have already happened. Here we can say whether 100 workers should all have been frequently mixing at this period of time. That's an open question. The advice was workers should stay apart as much as possible. If you've got 100 people mixing, probably something's gone wrong. The bigger point, though, is this. We, the public, were not told to make our own judgments when it came to epidemiological risk. We weren't told that if you think that the person you are going to go to a party with, if you had COVID, they would have already had COVID. We weren't told any of that. We were told, follow the rules. Follow the rules, do not break them. And to get an idea of how clear the government were about the importance of following the rules to the letter, I want to show you this bit of government propaganda from the time. Focus on that middle panel. It shows someone on oxygen, presumably fighting for their life, and it reads, "Look her in the eyes and tell her you never bend the rules." That's what we were all being told. Look her in the eyes, this person who looks like they're fighting for life, and tell her you never bend the rules. Now Michael Fabricant is going on television and saying, if you didn't bend the rules, you're a cold fish. If you didn't bend the rules, you're someone who feels no compassion for the people you work with. Because if someone is working hard and you don't bend the rules to let them have a party with gin and tonics and beer and sausage rolls, then you're the problem. You're the one who has acted immorally. So it's similar to the Dominic Cummings situation. Not only are we being told they're allowed to break the rules and we're not, we're now being told if you didn't break the rules, that's a moral failure of you. By breaking the rules, they were being the morally righteous people. It's the rest of us schmucks who not only missed out on good times by not going to these parties, but actually we were the ones who were morally lacking by not having rule-breaking parties. They have no shame, do they?
I think you're right to draw a broader brush here than just looking at Boris Johnson. I think it's important here to frame this as a government problem, not just a Boris Johnson problem, because I think there's a risk here that we're seeing in the press of over focusing on Boris Johnson. Did Boris Johnson attend the party? Yes or no? Obviously, that's a pertinent question. He is the leader of this country. He is ultimately responsible for what happens. But I think framing this as a personal, eccentric error of judgment or a sign of Johnson's unique contempt for the British public, it's clearly not just about that. This party was attended by 50 people. The email invite went out to 100 people. And it was, I assume, sent on under the assumption or with the confidence that none of those 100 people would push back or tell the press. We now know, obviously, that some did, but I'm sure the person who sent the email thought it was perfectly fine. And there was a confidence that if the press did find out, the press wouldn't report on it. And that they'd essentially still be able to get away with it. This is a Conservative Party problem. And in fact, I would argue it's actually a British establishment problem because it is rooted in that one rule for them, one rule for us logic. Now, I want to know how many members of the press knew or have known that that was happening. And why didn't we know about it at the time? I think, there is a compelling argument to say that they shouldn't have reported it at the time because at the time we really needed everyone to follow restrictions, to follow the guidelines. And if it had been reported in the middle of that the government were having a party of 50 people, then chances are people would just stop abiding by the regulations, and that would cause a crisis in confidence and a public health crisis. Okay, I can be sympathetic to that argument. But the least the press could have done, knowing that this is what was happening behind the scenes, and we don't know exactly if anyone did know, but chances are, these spheres are very porous. A lot of people move between them. Surely, the least you could have done is not done the government's bidding for them, the government's narrative bidding for them. Because at this time, when scientific advisors were advising one thing, the government was not following that scientific advice. We were having an astronomical number of hospitalizations. We, at that time, the media was essentially continuing this idea that, we shouldn't criticize Boris Johnson because we're in the middle of a crisis, or he's just doing the best he can in really difficult circumstances. And so that is sort of part of this issue. It's not just Boris Johnson himself. It's the press, it's the Conservative Party as a whole, it's the armed police officers that Michael Fabricant has said were probably there at the time, to think that the police were beating the crap out of Sarah Everard protesters at the same time as protecting this party that was going on in the middle of lockdown. It's absolutely just appalling, and it shows us again that it's one rule for them and one rule for us is the central organizing logic of this government and the British state, the press, the police as a whole. And we've seen that one rule for them, one rule for us in this case, and we know it from that longer record. So I think it's really important to not focus too much on Boris Johnson, even though I understand we want to get him to resign because he doesn't have, there's a crisis in confidence and we need that for public health. But also, what does this tell us about it's not going to just be fixed. This culture of impunity, this culture of entitlement is not going to be fixed by just replacing Boris Johnson with someone else.